And I'm John Henry Smith. Del Walters has the morning off. A new wave of violence erupting overnight in Jerusalem and Gaza. Israeli jets and drones killed at least 9 Palestinian fighters. Ukraine's president says he's confident he can recapture more territories after the military retakes control of several strategic cities over the weekend. President Petro Poroshenko says he's tightening the ring around terrorists. Over the weekend, the army says they pushed fighters out of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk and 2 neighboring towns. Poroshenko says he's ready to launch major offensives in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Well, a political deadlock in Afghanistan is threatening the country's transition to a new leader. The election commission there plans to announce preliminary results today from the June runoff vote. But there are international calls, including from U.S. senators, for an election audit. Both presidential candidates have made allegations of foul play in the polls. In our next hour, we're live in Kabul for the latest. Well, the Obama administration says it is ready to take on the rising tide of children crossing the border into the United States. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson says he's working to seal the borders, but politicians on both sides of the aisle say there's not enough being done to stem this growing crisis. Mike Vaquera joins us live in Washington. Mike, tell us more about this battle over the border.
Well, just something about it, John Henry.
Mike, what, if any, steps is the government taking to care for these kids while they're awaiting deportation?
Well, we've
seen a severe weather risk today.
Oh, for more on the morning national forecast, let's bring in meteorologist Ebony Dion. The 4th of July weekend took a deadly turn in 2 of the nation's biggest cities. Erica Pizzi joins us now. And Erica, independence celebrations were stopped short by shootings in Chicago and New York. Well, you heard Mr. Jeffrey reference it just now. Fears of a new type of al-Qaeda bomb will soon change the way you travel internationally. The TSA says it will start requiring passengers at some international airports to turn on electronics such as cell phones and computers before boarding planes headed to the U.S. Devices which do not power up will not be allowed on planes. Their owners may also have to undergo additional screening. Marijuana sales are a step closer to becoming legal in Washington state. Today, about 20 stores are expected to get their licenses so they can start offering pot to customers tomorrow. But there may not be enough marijuana to go around. Fewer than 80 growers are now legally authorized to produce weed for sale. And most stores there will have less than 10 pounds per day to offer customers.
Like the lower 100s.
Wow.
Give a new meaning to the word hot off the presses. Thank you very much, Ebony Dion.
Taking to the streets after a weekend of attacks by the armed group Al-Shabaab.
A big rally in Kenya pressuring the government to provide more security. That's a live look at Chicago, Illinois, site of one of the great events in the summertime around the Midwest, the Taste of Chicago.
Oh, good knowledge. Good morning and welcome back to Al Jazeera America. I'm Stephanie Sy.
And I'm John Henry Smith. Ahead in this half hour, the aunt and uncle of an American teen seen on surveillance tape allegedly being beaten by Israeli police. They'll join us live to talk about their family's ordeal. Well, violence in Kenya has left at least 29 people dead. Officials say the armed Somali group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack Saturday in 2 coastal towns. Residents say many of the victims had their hands tied and their throats slashed. This latest bloodshed is increasing the worries inside Kenya that the government may not be doing enough to keep residents safe. For more, we're joined by Nazanin Moshiri in Nairobi. That's where major rallies are being held today. Nazanin, what's at the heart of these protests? Well, today is also the anniversary of the country's violent July 7th or Saba protest. Can you tell us more about that? In our next hour, we'll head back to Jerusalem and speak with a Middle East expert about whether this latest flare-up could escalate into war. As for a record-breaking $2 billion to former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, the NBA kicked Donald Sterling out of the league after he was caught making racist comments. And by the way, I mean, they've got until July 15th. There's a deadline, or that offer will expire.
All right, well, let's take a look at some other headlines making news around the world. In Tennessee, there are 162,000 residents caught in a coverage gap to this, but they said that the elephant actually cried, that they could see tears coming down its eyes.
Well, elephants live about 65 years, so he's in his golden years. Hopefully he has time to enjoy life as opposed to merely endure life.
Yeah, that's a nice thought.
Well, new allegations of spying from one of Washington's closest allies.
Germany reaches out personally to victims of pre-sex abuse.
We'll have more on that in just a moment, but we begin with breaking news out of Mexico. A very large earthquake shook the southern part of the country. It measured 7.1 on the Richter scale. It happened about 22 miles west of the city of Tapachula. Right now, there is no word of damage or injuries, but we'll keep an eye on this breaking news.
They came and attacked me and actually went unconscious, and I woke up in the hospital.
An American teenager speaks out after being beaten in Jerusalem. And this morning, that city and Gaza are on edge after a new wave of violence erupted overnight. Israeli jets and drones killed at least 9 Palestinian fighters. Al Jazeera's Nick Schifrin is in Jerusalem. Nick, this is the strongest blow from Israel on Hamas fighters in that region. What's the situation like there now? Well, let's switch to the American teenager, Tarek, who was beaten up by Israeli police forces. He was released on bail and is on house arrest, but he hasn't been charged with anything. Here's what his mother had to say.
Are you putting him on house arrest? Makes no sense. I'm American. I know the American law. This doesn't happen in America.
Nick, can you tell us how Tarek is doing today?
And if you combine that with all the tension in Gaza, it really does seem here that everyone's fighting on multiple fronts and the tension in this region is increasing.
The situation growing increasingly volatile. Al Jazeera's Nick Schifrin in Jerusalem. Thank you so much. Well, we have much more ahead on the situation unfolding in the Middle East. We'll go inside Gaza with a look at Palestinian outrage over these deaths. Plus, our Middle East expert on whether this could lead to all-out war. And for the very latest information, 24/7, you can always log on to aljazeera.com. Well, in Ukraine, President Petro Poroshenko says his order to liberate Donetsk and Luhansk is now in effect. The president tweeted about tightening the ring around pro-Russian separatists. While smoke was seen rising over the suburbs of Luhansk, at least 2 people were killed. Meanwhile, separatist fighters chased out of Sloviansk have moved to Donetsk. Al Jazeera's Scott Heidler is there and says fighters are now trying to reorganize.
Heidler, Al Jazeera, Donetsk, Ukraine.
Well, the Ukrainian government says its forces have also retaken 2 additional smaller cities in the east from pro-Russian rebels. Pressure growing on the Obama administration over immigration. The White House says it's ready to take on the rising tide of children crossing the border into the United States, while Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson says he's working to seal the borders. Politicians on both sides of the aisle say there's not enough being done to stem the growing crisis.
Part of a system of wicked weather that swept across the plains over the weekend.
Wicked weather indeed. Well, welcome back to Al Jazeera America. In just a moment, the deadly rash of violence in 2 American cities and the plan to put an end to it. We are looking live at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful morning in our nation's capital. I'm sure that's one of the many spots that school kids off on summer vacation will be visiting this time of year.
Yes, welcome back to Al Jazeera America. I'm Stephanie Sy.
And I'm John Henry Smith. Just ahead in this half hour, the running of the bulls. Wait until you hear how many people literally took the bull by the horns on day 1. 9 Palestinian fighters are dead after missile strikes in the Gaza Strip. It follows a week of protest and violence across the region. Al Jazeera's John Hendren is in Gaza with the latest. Indonesia is often cited as a positive example in Southeast Asia because of its strong economy. It's also praised for its history of religious tolerance. But as Al Jazeera's Jamila Alandogan reports, that tolerance is being threatened by recent attacks on minorities.
Jazeera, Yogyakarta, Indonesia.
Presidential elections are set to take place in Indonesia this Wednesday. Back to one of our top stories this morning, the turmoil in Iraq. Earlier, we told you about how violence was shaking Baghdad. And with deadly fighting hitting nearly every corner of the country, nearly 1 million people have been displaced. Jamal El-Shayal reports on a local charity struggling to provide help for hundreds of refugees.
Not kill people's will to live. Jamal El-Shayal, Al Jazeera, Khanaqin, Northern Iraq.
So many children in that piece. There are reports this morning that the Iraqi army has carried out a series of air raids in the west. Hospital officials in the area say at least 9 people have been injured, including 3 children.
Back to you.
Those videos of the tornado, so incredible. Yebeni Dion, thank you so much.
Well, soccer superpower is set to face off at the World Cup.
But even losing teams are getting a hero's welcome. We'll tell you how the World Cup is bringing countries together. Well, you can get the latest updates on our detained journalists by visiting our website and on Twitter using the hashtag FreeAJStaff. And that'll do it for us here in New York. I'm John Henry Smith.
And I'm Stephanie Sy. Ahead in 2 minutes, the latest on the tensions between Israel and Gaza.
We'll leave you with a look live at our nation's capital. Have a great morning.